Hello, and welcome to Consider This, Becoming a Leader in Your Community, presented by Jackson County Library Services. I am Carrie Tannehill, Adult Services Librarian, and along with me is Roosh Branch Manager Thalia Truesdale, and three panelists that I will introduce shortly. Consider This programs are designed to spark provocative conversations about big ideas. This program is made possible with the support of the Oregon Humanities, the National Endowment for the Humanities, Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, and the Oregon Cultural Trust and Jackson County Library Services. This program is being recorded. As I mentioned earlier, the recording of the program will be uploaded to the JCLS Beyond You channel within 2 weeks. If you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. It is kind of a discussion format. We will be taking a break probably about 45 to 50 minutes in, just a quick stretch break, since it is a 90-minute program. But if you do have questions, we will probably stop if it ties in with what is being discussed and answer them then, or there's also a Q&A after the break. The opinions and views expressed in this program are those of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Jackson County Library Services. So now I'm going to introduce you to our three panelists that we have with us today. We have Community 101 Coordinator Jayden Deering. Her background's in education with more than a decade spent in teaching in public secondary schools in Texas and Oregon. Her teaching focuses on social studies and the AdVid program for potential first-generation college students. Her passion for working with youth and belief in the power of hands-on learning has made her a role model and Community 101's coordinator, and it's been a perfect platform for her to engage young Oregonians in philanthropic opportunities. She's in North Portland with her husband and three sons. And then we also have Adam Danforth, Collaborating Director at Rogue Food Unites. Rogue Food Unites is the Southern Oregon-based nonprofit coordinating local food businesses to meet the feeding needs of wildfire evacuees. Adam is also a James Beard award-winning butcher and author, American Ambassador for the Butcher's Manifesto, and a board member of the Chefs Collaborative and Good Meat Project. Adam lives in Ashland. And then we also have with us Seth Kaplan, Executive Director of Greater Applegate, is joining us. Seth, Greater Applegate is a nonprofit focused on building the economic, environmental, and social vitality of the Applegate Valley. The Greater Applegate is hosting listening sessions to develop a community vision for the Applegate Valley. Seth's prior accomplishments have included working with a team of youth and government agencies to build a 13-acre youth complex, leading a 4-year community visioning project in an unincorporated area, and aligning human priorities within a county budgeting process. He's currently exploring strategies to find more time to enjoy the beauty and magic of the 20 acres of the Applegate Valley he shares with his wife and dog Lily and cat Shane. His wife Lily, dog Shayna, and cat Sweepy. Sorry, I got that out of order, Seth. Apologize for that. Okay, so we have our three panelists with today. The program that we're doing today is in cooperation with Oregon for Humanities, but it also ties in with our summer reading program thing, Readers Are Leaders. And so we're talking about today is how to become a leader in your community. And so the first question that I'm going to go for the panelists, they will kind of answer them in rotating order, is the first question is to answer a question, a good leader or volunteer blank. So why don't we start with Adam to answer that first question, and then Katie and Seth, you'll go in the order after him.
Thanks, Carrie. Thanks for the introduction. Happy to be here with everybody. A good leader or a volunteer. I mean, two very different qualities I feel like that need to be utilized in order to do both of them. From an aspect of leadership, I feel like a great leader is somebody who can doesn't need to be at the front, doesn't really need to center themselves necessarily in the work that they're doing, but is able to galvanize people through positive inspiration, and really seeing sort of like the intrinsic value that people are able to bring, and are there in a way to offer guidance and direction without it being sort of like in the form of overbearing structure so that's how I see good leadership. A good volunteer, I mean, on time, um, showing up, being like agile and open and really adaptable to helping out in any way that an organization really needs them to. And hopefully from an organizational standpoint, you're well organized to integrate volunteers when they show up, which is also part of taking advantage of great volunteers or any volunteers.
Katie, how would you answer the question?
My first thought when I heard the prompt, especially from a volunteer perspective in the work that I do, is a volunteer and really a successful leader are plugged into their communities and really aware of the specific needs for their communities. I think I'm maybe hyper aware of that as a person living in the Portland metro area, but serving the state. Is that oftentimes the most successful volunteers and leaders we have are ones who are really authentic within their communities.
Seth, what's your answer?
So, yes, seeing the question posed the way it is, it reminded me, I used to work for an elected official for many years, and he called his community meetings leadership convenings. And he used to say that anybody who cared enough about something to show up and was willing to take action on it, even as much as showing up at a meeting, in his mind was a leader. So I could combine them that way based on the way he was thinking about it. I would probably maybe go a little bit further. And to me, a leader is somebody who holds an inclusive community vision, something beyond their own vision, and is able to motivate others in that shared vision. And also has the capacity to kind of change along with the community. So if things start to, you have an idea, you don't just get stuck in your idea. You can kind of, you're not always like feeling like you have to be out in front, as Adam said. And I would say also to me, a good volunteer is one who shows up. So if you show up, you're a good volunteer. And to me, a great volunteer is one who shows up with commitment and passion and, really wants to do something because they're excited about it. That's a great volunteer.
Thank you for your answers, all three of you. So for the next question, kind of delves a little more deeper into how you have become involved in your communities. Katie, why don't you answer this first, and then Seth, and then Adam would go after you.
So as a volunteer, how I've delved into my community or
in your current organization that you're with
now? Of course. So the program that I run for Oregon Community Foundation is called Community 101. And the work that we're doing is basically running programs statewide to introduce high school students to youth philanthropy. They receive a grant and they identify community need and then work on serving their community. And so I feel, at the heart of the work that we're doing, we're asking students to consider the needs that they have and encourage philanthropy that is brainstormed and researched and problem solved, and then those solutions are implemented within their own communities. And this is kind of an extension of the work that OCF at large is doing as far as statewide leadership councils and finding ways to really allow communities to have agency and voice and control over the change that we're implementing statewide and the programs that we're supporting.
Seth, what's your answer to the question?
So when I was thinking about the question, it really kind of took me back because, I think I got into this work that I do really from, my family. When I was young, my family thought of themselves as outsiders. And I think I was really impacted by that and felt really from a fairly young age that people deserved to have a voice and needed to have a voice. And when I was young, I got in some trouble around feeling that everybody should have a voice. And over time, I started to develop some skills around that. and able to actually do it in a way that maybe was more effective. And so I've been doing community building work for a really long time, but when I moved to the Applegate, what I discovered, it just really surprised me that that I live in a place where there's 3 counties, there's no local government, there's just there's no kind of organizing model here. So it just kind of felt like I landed in a place where my skill set was needed. And it really, I showed up at a meeting and pretty soon ended up with the organization that I'm with now, and have been working on this for a while. So it really feels like, for me, it was kind of a really fortunate combination of the things that I care about, landing in a place that I love. And so I get to do work that I love in a place that I love. So it just really feels like kind of a perfect opportunity for me.
Adam, it's your turn. Can you answer the question?
Yeah, so we're on why you became involved in your community. That's the
yeah,
question.
Or organization that you're involved with. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Would you like me to also go into the 2 bullet points that you noted underneath there? Because those cover a couple different areas as well.
Sure, if you want to, feel free.
I mean, as I mentioned, so Rogue Food Unites, we're the state contracted feeding agency for evacuees in Deschutes, Douglas, Klamath, Josephine, and Jackson County. So we began right after the Almeda fire last year. So we've been around for 9.5 months. And I mean, how I became involved is really just the call to help in the midst of an emergency. I have a background that was in food, is in food still, and my work through the Good Meat Project, a Portland-based nonprofit, and Chefs Collaborative, which is another nationwide nonprofit, but based out east, was both also around strengthening communities through food choices, through understanding the origins of the food that you're choosing to purchase and consume, whether it be through a restaurant or also as a professional chef or as a consumer, all those things that were part of understanding what makes a strong food system. So when the fires happened, the evident opportunity to ensure that people were well fed was certainly there, but really a lot of that motivation of what we were doing was around trying to figure out how to funnel federal aid money in ways in which it would actually stay within the community. And at the time, in the middle of the pandemic, we had fallow capacity really in a vast number of restaurants and food businesses. So leveraging that, trying to save them from shuttering during the pandemic, and then engaging them in a way to provide food support for those evacuees at the same time. It just so happens that the restaurant industry, the hospitality industry, has one of the highest sort of like recirculation rates of revenue into local economies. So it happened to be a really good proposition in order to funnel money, or I should say direct money that was coming from the federal government towards locally owned, locally invested food businesses, which could be restaurants, caterers, food trucks, farms, co-ops, and then have that entire component of the food resource system here engaged in the recovery effort for the evacuees that are also the residents. And I mean, it was sort of like on a lark, and it ended up really transforming to something that has taken off in many ways that I would never have anticipated. I mean, some of the incredible benefits of that, aside from just like the feeling of actually supporting people with good food during a point of their recovery, culturally appropriate food that recognizes the struggle they're going through, was also really to be able to engage in the mutual aid community network that had sprung up from that emergency as well. I personally, unlike Seth and Katie, it was like I wasn't really actively involved in this community prior to this effort. my work took me afar usually. I traveled and I taught butchery and meat and flavor science. And so I was suddenly thrust into a community network in a very different way. And it's amazing what I've learned about who's here, like the amazing organizations that are actually in Southern Oregon, the amazing efforts that are being done for so many of the communities that are here that I had absolutely no idea, even though I had lived here for almost 8 years at the time. So really, sadly, it took a natural disaster for me to plug in the way that I did. But at this point, I'm like so grateful for what it's allowed me to see as far as like, and I think in that point of the pandemic, me and other people involved in our organization really needed that sort of like reconnection with humanity and a hopefulness around sort of like humanity showing up in a way that had felt like we hadn't connected in so long through the isolation. So through that whole, that interconnectedness, I think really re-inspired so many of us, and has kept us inspired for the 9.5 months that we've had to keep going to feed people, which is, going to continue, without end in sight at this point.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Seth.
So yeah, I really, really appreciate that. And it just, I guess I want to concur that, with when the pandemic happened, that wasn't the work that we were doing, and that wasn't the work we were thinking about. But there was, you sort of had that, first of all, we were unable to continue the work we were doing, but also just kind of, we looked around in our community and realized that nobody was going to be doing the work that needed to happen, and kind of took kind of a similar attitude of, we reached an agreement, or easy agreement with our funders that, they let us use our funding to buy food from the local restaurants and distribute it to the food pantries. And, where we are, the free lunch program for students didn't extend this far. They had to go into Medford to get food, so which many of them couldn't do. So, we were distributing food to those families, and even providing like vegetables that plants that they could plant in their yards and things like that. So it actually, similar to what Adam was saying, it's not something I want to happen again or want to continue, but there were, aspects about all this that really did bring community together and make us understand that we are a community in a way that, just wasn't so clear before. So I think it's, coming out of it, we're sort of coming out of it with an evolved sense of ourselves. And so, I appreciate what Adam said. I appreciate, just that I think many communities are seeing it that way.
And to continue to sort of like tag into that, I just like part of what I hope when I'm like hearing me, then hearing you sort of like mirror what I'm also saying is this reflection on sort of like which communities are the ones who are feeling galvanized through this process, and it's sort of like the actual, I'm hoping that there's been a lot of flight out of our area because of the lack of resources available for people recovering from the fires. And that there were these communities that were in these areas that burned, that were resourceful. Many of these people were food insecure prior to that, low social economic status, suffering from other sort of like, underserved community sort of situations. And they relied on each other in such a way that was disrupted not only from the pandemic, but then additionally through the fires. And so I wonder if it's like, is it the communities that were least impacted by the disaster almost that were the ones that sort of were able to reconnect and sort of like do this, were actually the ones that were most impacted by these concurrent disasters going on? We have a housing crisis, we have a pandemic, we have a natural disaster, we've got, food insecurity, immigration issues that are all part of this. It's like, are those, I wonder, and I speak without it having any understanding of an answer as to whether or not those communities are feeling like they are knitting back together in a way that is more resilient than they were prior, and I hope in some cases they are. I think in the hotels it's really, really difficult, but I'm hopeful that there's some of that potentially happening in this recovery process.
Katie, Seth, and Adam kind of talked about benefits and challenges to being involved in your community organization, and I was just wondering if you had anything you wanted to add to what you.
Yeah, I mean, especially in the context of this year, it's running a program where there's so much autonomy for students across the state. There's obviously been, benefits in the sense that we've been able to really pivot and serve specific needs. We had areas that were able to kind of pivot and support wildfire recovery efforts and food insecurity as well. And the students were kind of making those choices. So it's been nice to experience the flexibility that we have and really in real time demonstrate to students how the philanthropic process works. So you don't just have a mission and, keep moving forward when the mission that you have is not serving the greatest need of the community. You pivot and you meet the community where they are. And so I would say that was kind of a benefit of where we are and what we're doing. But of course, there's challenges. There's never enough funding. And that is, certainly just in our line of work, a reality. And you get creative and you work around it and you do the best that you can. It's been a challenge to keep morale up for students who are now charged with that work. It's certainly a learning process in this field. Just as far as, the program that I'm running, it's a statewide school-related program. So when school closures there's been a lot of creative pivoting and work that we've done to make the program and curriculum accessible online. And that I'm moving ahead into the next question, but it's been a challenge, but overall just wholly inspiring to see that in a year when students could maybe want to shelve the idea of philanthropy and focus on, in some cases, extreme and critical need in their own families and their own communities, they've really come on board with the idea of what they can do to get their hands dirty, so to speak, and make a difference. I say answers kind of one of the benefits, and also what motivates me is to see that work, and then to, really just be watching them do these cool things is so inspiring. And then to have models for what's working in communities that are outside of my home base in Portland is just a thing that brings me joy daily.
Seth and Adam, before we move on to the next question, did you have any other things you wanted to add about benefits, challenges, or what motivates you to move forward, what you're doing for the community?
Well, let's see. So the benefits to me is I feel very fortunate to be working, doing community work in the community where I live. And, I've often done community work in other people's communities and was very aware that it wasn't mine. So just that opportunity to work and live, be part of building community in my own community. I'm very, very grateful for that. I think the challenge, certainly the challenge for me is that as you get into this kind of work, looking at community building, probably anywhere, certainly in the Applegate Valley, is it's pretty easy to get overwhelmed with how much is needed and how few resources are available. And obviously financial resources, human resources, community resources. There's just, I pretty much every day am aware of what I haven't accomplished, that I can see in my mind and feel like we should be accomplishing. So, that's an ongoing challenge, and part of the work of maybe caring, but I do, I always appreciate that that's, the struggle. It feels like an honest struggle. So it's kind of a, sort of a daily feeling gratitude and feeling, what do I check this off my list? You kind of never do. So I'm just kind of knowing that.
Adam, how about you? I know you touched on this when you first answered the question, but do you have anything else you'd like to add?
I think my, a benefit and a challenge has been that we're a new nonprofit. We were started in the midst of a disaster, so we're in active response to a natural disaster at the same time as creating an organization. The incredible logistical challenge that's there. Almost 10 months into it, and we've served almost 700,000 meals since September, and we now have 17 full-time employees, and we're moving into our first permanent space next month. To get there, just logistically is challenging, but in the midst of it, really, I feel like the greatest challenge and inspiration has been the opportunity to create a new nonprofit that is able to focus equity, anti-racism, values at the center of what we're doing, from culture building internally at the organization. How are we dismantling structures? And to what Katie was saying, it's sort of she's grateful to see that there are models in other communities for what you're doing. For me, what the challenge has been is that there hasn't been a model for especially in disaster relief for an organization that is centered in these values and isn't centered in this sort of savior complex that comes in with a lot of money, a lot of resources, helps for a short period of time, and then sort of leaves for the deflation of the community. So one of the things is how do we model something like this that is rooted in community that stays there? Because if they stay there, the money stays there. And how do we do that still not centering ourselves in that process? And so there's that's been the biggest challenge, which is a challenge as an individual, a challenge as a company, an internal organization. How do we cultivate a different culture that's there, that it doesn't have the urgency of a disaster relief organization? And then how do we also relate that to all the communities that we're serving in a way that is also listening to what their needs are through that process, and not necessarily through the lens of what we feel like they need? So learning that in such a short period of time has been a gift, but also an incredible challenge to contend with, which is, dovetails with what motivates me always to move forward, which is who am I serving? Am I serving myself, or am I actually serving my community? And is the work that I'm doing is my comfort zone is outside my comfort zone? It's at the edge of my growth is where my comfort is. If I'm sitting in the middle of my comfort zone, to me, that's stagnant. So my comfort is always at this edge of growth. And if that growth is me focusing on is my heart opening? Am I softening to the world around me? Am I reducing my judgment and my things that? That's what motivates me to move forward, and understanding that I'm involved in the right kind of work. If that's I'm moving through my community in a way where I am, I'm taking up less space while also receiving more from what their needs are, is sort of my internal compass for what moves me forward in the direction that I need to be going.
So the next question, Seth, I think it's your turn to go first, and then it'll be Adam and then Katie. How do you keep the community informed on the initiatives or projects that you or your organization is doing? Do you use the media, like the internet, TV, newspaper, social media? And how do you ensure that the message of what you're doing is accurately portrayed by the media? So Seth, I think it's your turn to go first.
Thanks. Yeah. This is one of our biggest challenges. In the Applegate, there's no local TV, there's no local radio, there's no local newspaper. We touch into various counties, so we're not covered by anyone, and we also have very inadequate internet here. So just kind of we can communicate by internet, but then there's an equity question of if we rely on internet, who are we leaving out? And so that's always that's the base of our challenge all the time. And the way that we approach that pre-pandemic and then now post-pandemic is we go to communities and speak to them there. We don't have a sort of a broadcast presence so much. We do use Facebook, and we have an e-newsletter that is actually not just about us, but anything that's going on in the community. And we actually have a community website that's open source, so anybody could put anything up on it that's of interest. But with this, what I shared just before that, we're just constantly aware. So who's not hearing this? And so we've done things like some of our projects have been to build bulletin boards in neighborhoods, so people could put up flyers and communicate with each other through flyers. And when we're doing something, we put up lawn signs on the road and in neighborhoods, so people know that something is happening. And then again, it's just our intention is to go to where people are. And for example, there's an evening market here. We go to the evening market and we just present things, as people walk by, we just share with them and, get their opinions about things, share with them things that we're doing and ask them what they think. We've done things like we've worked with the local schools and asked as part of the curriculum to have the students second, third, and fourth graders write stories about what it's like to live here. And, so that's sort of a way that we can speak with that group. And we did a pizza party with teenagers. And we had one of our meetings we did just in Spanish. And of course, all our meetings, we have childcare and free food. And we're just trying to make ourselves as accessible as possible because we don't know how else to reach people. And we still find, we don't succeed as well as we would like to in reaching people. But we're trying to do everything we can to make that happen. And, we're always, anytime anybody has an idea about how we can connect with people, we're always going to say yes to that.
Adam, what is your take on this question?
What Seth was saying, go to where people are is really just sort of the best way to think about it. I feel like it's sort of meeting people where they're at is such a more powerful way to connect community and to sort of help usher them into areas of either support or aspects of potential community change. Any of these sort of messages that you need to get out are it's really the best succinct way to put it. So I really like that, Seth. I think frankly we do a really poor job of getting the message out there of what we do, because one, we're so freaking busy actually just feeding people and trying to build an organization. So I feel my first career as an adult was for over a decade running a marketing and advertising company. So for me, this sort of which is fine because I have this sort of like PTSD from overwork in that sort of industry. So I sort of shy away from it. I'm not big in social media, but I am the communications director for us. And so like all the outward communication really comes through me in some form or another. I mean, it's a challenge. I feel like we can do better, but what I also recognize is that a lot of what the role that we play as an organization doesn't need to be sort of centered in the work that we do. We don't need to be the face. We really sit behind mostly community-based organizations, other CBOs, other sort of organizations that have been here longer. And so I think largely it's our collaboration with them that gets the word into the communities they serve. You know, if we're serving communities that have to do with homeless youth, we're like working with a CBO in that they're getting the message out there. And our collaborative message is part of what their message is. If we're reaching the Latinx community, we're collaborating with Northwest Seasonal Workers and UNITE, and like they're getting the message out. You know, if they're like dealing with other communities. So that aspect is really, I think, how we rely on more embedded community organizations in order to help in that regard. I think it also strengthens our message if we even needed one, because we already work with trusted organizations that are there. We're not like a new voice that people necessarily need to vet. We just sit behind the scenes and provide support to them. So certainly everything that we do is bilingual. I mean, that's like really front and center to what it is in order to reach the communities that were impacted by the fires here in Southern Oregon. It may be different in other areas of Oregon, but here in Southern Oregon, that's certainly a priority. I mean, from an aspect of like how we're portrayed as far as journalists and things like that. Frankly, I think the biggest challenge for us is that people want to make it look like it's a white male run organization, when actually there's 3 directors of this organization. 2 of them are women, and I am constantly having to direct media and journalists to recognize that there are 2 other women who are at the impetus of this organization, who play an equally active role, if not a greater role, in making sure that we are viable, that we are getting our work done, that we are like following through. Our operations director is an amazing woman, Amber Ferguson. Our other director is Jamie North, who is a third generation restaurateur in the Jackson County. It's like these are powerful people who are like fulfilling incredible roles at the organization and do not get the recognition because of this sort of like systemic problem of looking to see that there's a white male involved and wanting to point that attention there. And we utilize that benefit at certain times when we're dealing with like government agencies who basically often want to work in that capacity. But for the most part, when it comes to journalists, that is bar none the biggest challenge, is sort of like getting equal recognition of the women. I mean, we have 17 employees. There's 3 men. And you know, it's a powerful group of women and a powerful group of people, and they all deserve a lot of recognition. So a lot of the time I have to remove myself from potential like, or just direct them to interview somebody else at the organization, because if I'm the one who actually talks, it like, they automatically center the article on that. So, and then the rest of the time I ask for articles before they get published. And I, as an active editor and as an author, as a writer, I send back a lot of edits and a lot of requests, things that have to do with nuance. How are you talking about homeless communities? How are you talking about Latinx communities, other sort of communities, our outreach, like what the language is around what our roles are, what's our origin story, like a lot of that stuff needs to be addressed, because the lens that they often want to tell it through is like a hero story, and that's really not what our story is. So I think it's incredibly important for any organization that has the potential to have media coverage. I mean, we've been in Vogue, we've been in New York Times, we've been in like other high-profile publications, and there have been some real misses that have been there, and you feel it, and like it's not even what's felt in the community, it's actually what's felt inside us, inside the community, inside the organization, for people who are not recognized, and how that impacts, you know, their value to our organization, the work that they do. So I want to make sure that that's always out there, really front and center.
Katie, what's your take on this question?
So Community 101 has existed for about 25 years. It centers around a curriculum that's provided to students. And obviously the way that we communicate with communities changed over the last 25 years. So some of the work that I've done, especially in the last few, is to introduce students who are working through this sort of foundation grant program philanthropic curriculum, is to provide kind of hands-on instructions and a guide, and with the purpose behind it for press releases, engaging with communities, how to provide that information to media. So because we are working with, in some cases, elementary school students who work in the C101 curriculum, but there are templates and instructions and frequently asked questions and why. What is the why behind needing to communicate with journalists and media, and what is the purpose in talking about what you're doing? So that's some of the work that we're doing, is encouraging students statewide, because our programs range from the coast to Ontario, and encouraging them to use their voices in their own community to share about the work they're doing, in order to gain momentum and to educate people about what resources are available. That's especially important because often the students create mission statements for issues that are really, critical needs in their communities. As you can imagine, in this year, about 60% of our class mission statements were related to mental health, youth mental health, and challenges that are kind of byproducts of untreated mental health in communities. And so using their voices to know about what resources are, or in some cases aren't there, is critically important. So I support students in doing that. And kind of on that same vein, I really found, my job is just to watch them and cheerlead and vet nonprofits and things like that. But my favorite thing in the world to talk about is my program, but it rings really inauthentic for me to be bragging about the incredible work of the students at Oregon Islamic Academy, or Four Rivers Charter School, or Bandon High School, because I'm not there. I'm not doing the work. I didn't come up with what they're doing. I didn't identify their mission statement. So one of the things that I have instituted is that each school, as a part of their curriculum and education, is they draft a blog post so that I can share their story in their voice and what they learned, and I don't have to be this person who's in some cases 500 miles away, sharing about something that I truly didn't have to do with, and that I may be missing the point of some of the value of the work that they're doing. So I would say, that's how I'm making sure that what gets to the media is authentic. I do my very best to participate and support, but not be the voice, because I'm not doing the work. And I want to make sure that what's celebrated is centered in their communities. And then, of course, this year and every year, just the internet and making the curriculum accessible through a living document has been really helpful as far as keeping everybody on track and informed.
Are there any other comments or additional things, Seth and Adam, that you'd like to answer for this question that you missed or brought on by what other people said?
I would just like to recognize that in Katie's work, you're mentioning that the greatest thing that you were hearing about was youth mental health. Like just to even pause on the reality that that is one of the things that is overwhelmingly just such a struggle with children these days, adolescents, children of all ages, is in our work, as we're challenged with staying focused on a mission. Our mission is to support people through emergencies with the healing power of food. And it's sort of how do you define emergency? In a state when we have overall state when we have so many concurrent issues going on? Like, how is that not an emergency that you have youth mental health at like such a crisis level, like that, and so it's like a challenge also for, for us as an organization to figure out, like, how do you tease one disaster out from another? This has been really hard during this pandemic, a wildfire, and all these other things going on. I mean, I have to assume that there's some healing benefit to the work that you're doing, Katie, with these youths that are even exploring writing about that, in that process. So really kudos to you and the work that you're doing with that community, because they certainly need the support. Gosh.
It's all them. I'm just there to keep them between the ditches, so to speak.
Yeah, but I mean, still, the program is there to provide some support, some direction, those sort of things. I mean, it's great. It's good to know that those things are out there.
Thank you. It's wonderful.
So when you're involved in your community, how do you keep others with diverse backgrounds and ideas engaged in a common purpose? And if needed, adapt your purpose to a changing circumstances like COVID-19, or just how do you motivate others to move forward as you're working on being involved in your communities? And I think we're back to Adam. I think you start first, and then it'll be Katie and Seth to answer the question.
How do you keep others with diverse backgrounds engaged in a common purpose? I mean, that's a really big challenge. I mean, depending on where people are coming from, I mean, I feel like one, we don't have enough of. I mean, also just specifically from Rogue Food Unites, it's like we haven't been around long enough to necessarily talk about this in like in a changing landscape of situations. We've only been here during a disaster. So, and I think we also benefit from the value that, like, the work that we do is providing people with a human right, which is food. So like there's a common understanding and priority that's already there. I mean, I think that in order to like engage communities, I think, again, to reiterate what I was talking about before, which is really that our strength as an organization is in our partnerships with other community-based organizations, and those communities of diverse backgrounds, more often than not, already have trusted organizations that are there, that are advocates for their needs, that are listening to what the community needs, and our coordination with them is what enables us to adapt our own purpose in order to meet the needs from what the community has. I mean, there have been plenty of situations where I think we have overstepped our understanding, exceeded our I think just acted in a cavalier nature, where we sort of felt like we understood what people needed as far as evacuees in different situations, whether it be in a hotel, in an RV park, from a different cultural background. And we've had a lot of really helpful learning experiences in those collaborations with CBOs that have let us know that what we're doing is not the best approach. And I don't expect that we're not going to continue to make those mistakes. I think that the greatest strength that we have as an organization is that we are open to receiving that feedback, and we adapt because of it, and we receive it with grace and with appreciation. We're new to this in general, but also, as you navigate communities, people's needs are consistently changing. So, I think Seth was really talking about adaptability earlier, and talking about that as far as a good leader. I feel like in general, as an organization, that's like largely what I feel like allows us to also continue to provide something in the form that best meets people's needs. In a hotel, that's often a hot meal. Outside of a hotel, it may be certain raw ingredients that are based upon what that person's heritage is. If it's a houseless community member, what's the format of food that really fits them, and what are other ways that we can support them through the message of nutrition and food that may not necessarily be what we immediately understand. I think and to continue with that, not to take up too much time with this one, but last thing is it's really important to have a staff and that represents those communities too. So you have internal voices that have lived experiences that correlate with the communities and the cultures that you are providing support to. So, for us as an organization, we have people who've lost their home, who were evacuees, who are employees of ours. We have people from Black and Indigenous and other sort of communities of color that are mixed heritage, that are that have experience with houselessness, that have experience with food insecurity, have been in situations of poverty. These are all incredibly valuable perspectives that we look for in employment. And I feel like a lot of organizations don't look to the same sort of value with those perspectives that they could be. So I think that that's really a key part of it too, is that, the internal voice in the organization participates and is representative of those lived experiences.
Kitty, how would you answer the question?
I certainly host, we have about 40 classrooms / after school programs or organizations across the state who are participating in Community 101. So the diversity is sort of baked in, but it's also unique. There's unique programs in each community. So, and it's small grassroots efforts that the students are usually working on. We really encourage them. All of the youth philanthropy, I think, experiences all of the same challenges that professional adult philanthropy deal with, but maybe on a magnified scale, because there's the work of just educating about the process and adjusting for some of the just life skills that students haven't learned, particularly related to communication. So one of the things that we do and that's built into the curriculum is really intentionally researching and identifying community needs, polling, whether it be your whole class or the school or the community, to really identify what need people are seeing. And then we have found that really, creates a lot of buy-in from the beginning, because students are working toward a need that they've identified inside of their community. As far as keeping them kind of moving forward, one of the things that, before I ran Community 101 as a program manager, I was also a teacher advisor in a classroom where we worked with this grant program. It is really interesting to see students feel really passionately about a need that their community is experiencing. And then, of course, and this is something that we all deal with, you have $5,000 to offer and $15,000 worth of requests. And now how do you make that decision? And so we've baked in a lot of civil discourse and consensus building activities and ways for students to really think about wise stewardship of funds and the longevity, and really taking into consideration how to make the best use of the limited funds that we have to offer in communities. So that I think kind of answers how we're keeping diverse communities focused. As far as the pandemic, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but much in the same way that all nonprofits and foundations really had to look at, well, what did we want to do? What were we moving toward? And what does our community actually need right now? We encouraged school programs participating in Community 101 to revisit their mission statement and see if it still served the greatest need in their community or if they wanted to pivot. I think the most beautiful example of that, and this is me using my voice to describe an effort that I didn't participate in, but Oregon Islamic Academy, their group of students took the $5,000. They did research because they found a lot of food banks statewide especially early in the pandemic, pivoted to sort of like a pickup box system. So you would just go through and you would pick up your supply. And that was a real challenge for refugee and immigrant communities who are Muslim, because the food might not be halal, and it might not meet the dietary needs that the families were experiencing. So the students did their research, created a budget, and found a way, and this coincided with Ramadan, to create a food box for about $20 that would feed a family through the month of Ramadan, and allow those. It was just, I mean, layers upon layers of responsive and brilliant, that they found a way to support a marginalized community, to protect an underserved community, to kind of shield one of the most vulnerable communities in the area from a pandemic that we didn't know a lot about. I guess we still don't, but it's just sort of an example of how we, I think their previous mission had been encouraging women to participate in STEM. And they looked at that mission and said, this is important, but we need to pivot and make changes. And it was just beautiful what they chose to do. And then, of course, that grassroots effort, they were through the work that they did with the funds that they received from OCF, that kind of snowballed, and they were able to serve, I think, 500 families through the month of Ramadan. And anyway, yeah, so it's really prompted, and after kind of a second year of some creative thinking and changes related to COVID-19 and wildfires, it's really prompted me as a program coordinator to step back and think about the rules and how we operated and supported students in terms of curriculum pre-pandemic, and then how it was so the results of allowing the flexibility and the opportunities for students to pivot were just so encouraging and so positive. I'm really examining, moving into this next, now what would be the third school year impacted by these disasters, how can I facilitate that kind of flexibility and responsiveness in this program moving forward? So that's where I am right now. And that's a question I haven't answered yet, but I will.
Thanks, Katie. How about you, Seth, with a Greater Applegate?
Yeah, so diversity is a really interesting question in the Applegate Valley. And one of the things that struck me, I talked earlier about how we go to where people are, and we're trying to make sure that we engage with everybody. But, it's certainly true that while we don't have exactly accurate data, because the Applegate Valley isn't really considered a place, somewhere around 95% of the people in the Applegate Valley are white. And it's interesting. It kind of surprised me when we first started doing our listening sessions that people talked about one of the things that they really love about living here is the diversity. And so, when you sort of listen to that with, as with open ears, and, what do people mean by that? People talk about age diversity, and there's very deep political diversity in the Applegate, and there's diversity among people who have lived here for 40 years and people who moved here recently. And there's sort of different ways that people look at diversity here. And within that context, they feel like it's a place that's friendly. And so now when we had the listening session with the Latinx community, they didn't talk about diversity that way. And so, I find that it's important. It's always going to be challenging, but it's also important for me not to put my lens over a community's lens of, anything they say. And, we can continue conversation over time, but, I can't discount what people say as if I know better than they do. So I just want to kind of start by sharing that the work here has really encouraged me to look at diversity in new ways. And I appreciate that. And once I started to look at it that way, I could see it, and also could see that it's not all inclusive. And so it's just kind of like figuring those things out. And the challenge for us is always going to be, have we done everything that we can to reach everybody and hear from everybody? And, we're still it took us 18 months to gather a group of Spanish speaking community members to talk to. It wasn't that we couldn't, just sort of entering that community from our perspective just took a long time to make it happen. And it was worth, definitely worth the effort, and we need to do more there. And, we're conscious of like who can't get to a meeting, even if we're doing it in a neighborhood, neighborhoods are big, if you don't have a car or if you just, if you can't get to something. So there's just always the challenge of we think we're doing what we can. And then you always have to test yourself and ask over and over again, what else can we do? What more can we do? And the answer is always going to be that we could do more. So you have to stay really humble in that, I think. So with all that, I, again, have come to recognize in the specific work in the Applegate that one of the things is that there are some common threads when you talk to people and ask them, what they care about and what they wish were different. There are definitely some common threads that go across all the different groups that we've talked to. People are concerned about fire risk. People are concerned about forest management. People are concerned about internet equity. People are concerned about, in time of COVID, is everybody getting access to services and resources, and who's not getting what they need. And you start to find that there's more common ground in a local community that maybe there is in, say, a national conversation. And, people start to, there are ways that we can find commonality. And then in our conversation, we always try to bring in who's missing and what else can we imagine that somebody not us might need? And, where does that conversation go? So, that both brings us to other people we should talk to and other strategies for how to reach them. And also, people are surprisingly aware of, that there are others that don't have what they have. So, I've really come to appreciate that. And I would, in this we talked about the pandemic some earlier, so I don't want to, go too deep into that again. But I do think that, there's something as that happened and as that unfolded, it both raised questions about like sort of looking around and saying, like who is us and who is supporting us and how are we going to take care of us? Like those questions kind of came up naturally. And we sort of helped broadcast those questions, but they weren't ones that we just invented all on our own. And it started to, you start to have more of a sense of both a common identity and suddenly you have awareness, and that is carried on, that continues to carry on in a way that I think is really healthy, is people are now saying, when we were all worrying about who was going to get vaccinated, and that raised awareness that there actually are no health clinics in the Applegate Valley. Well, what about the people that never have access to a health clinic in the Applegate Valley? And when we had to like drive into Medford or or grants passed to get tested and you didn't have a car, well, what happens to people who never have a car and like need to get access to food or, going to see a doctor or social services, and there's none here. And like people became just more aware, and it gave us a platform to talk about those things more openly. We could say, we all notice this. And, now there are like, let's think about the people who live this all the time. And it wasn't us, sort of preaching something. It was just kind of asking the next question. And so I think that, I think there's been some opportunity there. And I think it's actually, there's kind of a motivating force behind that to think about things differently. And just one more thing to say about motivation. For us, we're asking people to share with us what they think about things. And so, when we're trying to encourage people to like show up to something and tell us what they think about something, it's like become very aware that people don't really get asked that a lot. Like, we really want to hear from you, and, we value your opinion, and we're going to show up and bring food and, other things, childcare, and take care of the situation. We just want to hear from you. And I'm just amazed at how much people just appreciate that. So it's actually less of a challenge for us to get people to engage that way, because they just, they're just like, wow, somebody's like asking us what we think. And our challenge is just to ask enough people and find, make sure that we really are being as diverse as possible.
So we have about 9 minutes left. I do want to open it up for attendees. If you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. But for the moment, while we're waiting on that, if the panelists, if you could answer the last question, what advice would you give to someone wanting to start a project or initiative in their community? And then we'll start with Katie, Seth, and then Adam to finish it out.
I would encourage anybody who is really wanting to start in their community to, and it feels a little bit redundant, but to really identify a need that you feel is unique to your community and that you feel passionate about. Of course, the best leaders and volunteers, maybe at the root of it, are the ones who show up and start doing. And that kind of resonated me with what Adam was saying, right? That this isn't work you were doing and now you are, and you showed up and you're problem solving and making tremendous change. And so, I think that that's a component. And then just becoming familiar with what resources do or don't exist, so that kind of where you're starting from and what you need to do to move forward, and be as efficient and realistic as you can. As a tiny diversion, one of the examples this year is the students in Ontario who were really determined to support mental health, devised their mission statement, and then realized that doesn't exist. There are no nonprofits to support. There's not work really being done specifically in Four Rivers for youth mental health. And so they, rather than pitch that and start over, they came up with their own idea and worked on a community skate park that has now snowballed. What's really interesting is it's gathered momentum and brought in people who have funds but maybe weren't considering that as an issue that needed to be addressed. And they've got a pretty impressive community gathering space that they're building, and it's pulled in funds outside of their own grant program. But so I would say, know what needs need to be addressed in your community, and do a little bit of digging to see what's being done and kind of what you can do to accentuate that, or where you need to start.
Seth, what's your take?
I really appreciate that, and probably have similar advice. It's advice I've probably been giving for about 30 years now. And I really do feel when somebody's thinking about starting something new that they should start by doing some research and making sure or just checking to see is anybody already doing that. And also just, doing some outreach and determining that is there an actual need that you're fulfilling, or is this, sort of something that you want to do? Like, is there a need that's being addressed here? And I always want to emphasize to people, if you can start out by being a project of some other organization or being part of another organization in another way, I would really recommend doing that. Like starting a project from scratch, as Adam has shared and could share more, it's just not easy. And there's a lot that you have to do that has nothing to do with what you think when you have it in your mind that I'm gonna, feed the world or, solve, animal cruelty or any number of things that are really important. You just don't think about, the raising money part and the administration part and, staff and human resources. And, there's just all these other issues that sort of get in the way of the actual work that you want to do, but you have to do those things. And so I just really encourage people to not start with, I have this idea and I want to do it, and start with just seeing who's doing something like that and having some conversations about it.
Adam, what's your take on the question?
I mean, a lot of great things that you both have shared about that, and I won't reiterate them all. I think the question of who are you serving is really an important one. Are you doing this for actually the community, or are you doing it for yourself? Is like a real important thing to understand. Like, I mean, there's an aspect of seemingly selflessness that isn't so much selfless, and it's okay if you want to do some of that for your own motivation and inspiration and sort of like, but understanding who's being centered in that effort is and whose well-being, I think, is really an important thing to understand. The fundraising, understand, like, I mean, this is like sort of like a can of worms, and it's like right at the end of this, but it's sort of like fundraising for a nonprofit, I think, is often like a very thankless effort. I think the grant system is sort of like a travesty, I think, in many ways, of like the amount of work that's done that goes unrewarded in order to try to convince people who have made their money off the backs of other people to then give it to organizations who do good in order to make these people who made the money feel better about themselves. Like, I just don't really often want to participate in that system. So realize often what you're getting involved in when it comes to actually fundraising, which is going to be the motivation, before you end up thinking that this is going to be an idea that I can go out and ask for money, and what that's going to be like, because fundraising has its own systemic challenges within it, and I think that's one of the biggest hurdles as far as any sort of nonprofit. Even when there is a lot of money available, access to that money is a process even within itself that often will be a lot of work that is for naught in many ways. So being clear about that upfront, and I think Seth's advice is really in that realm a great one, which is connect with other organizations that may even in a cursory way be doing what you're doing, and try to figure out how maybe it could fit into somebody else's mission, and see about collaborating and having a project, because no one wants to go at any of this stuff alone. So the collaborations are really so much of the key to, I think, any nonprofit really being successful.
So we have a minute left, and we don't have any questions from the attendees. I want to thank Katie, Adam, and Seth for being with us today at our program. Consider this being a part of being a leader in your community. Thank you for sharing your perspectives of being involved in your communities and what your organizations are doing. Any other final comments or questions for the panelists that you want to ask the things that come up real quick before we end our program today?
I want to thank you for hosting us and facilitating, and appreciate the opportunity to have the discussion with Adam and Katie.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, it was so great to meet you both, all of you, Carrie, you included, and really just I got a lot from hearing both of you talk from your experience and what your organizations do. I appreciate you both sharing really openly about all that.
Yeah, and I have the same sentiments. It's always such a privilege to engage and learn more. So especially from Southern Oregon. So thank you guys for having me and facilitating such an interesting conversation.
And I'd like to thank you all too. This was wonderful. I've learned a lot. I'm in a few organizations that rely on volunteers, and I got some good stuff from you. Thank you.
So I have 4:31, so I'm going to go ahead and end our meeting today. But again, thank you for your time and sharing your expertise with us, Katie, Seth, and Adam. And we're going to go ahead and end the program. Just as a reminder, the recording will be uploaded to the Jackson County Library Services JCLS Beyond YouTube channel within about 2 weeks. Basically, just as long as we can, as soon as we can get the raw recording uploaded to YouTube, it'll be up there.